English translation 398th contact Wednesday, the 24th of August, 2005, 055 HRS.
You let me know through Florena that you have further work from Hans-Georg to correct. Since we have suspended the other correction work until the 10th of September and will not continue until the 17th of September, I want to come here today to do the work of Hans-Georg with you. Greetings, dear friend.
Ptaah, dear friend, welcome and greetings. It is nice that you're coming here today and that you can take your time. I do not think we will finish proofreading tonight, because there are 16 pages to be done.
That will really not be possible in an hour, because then I have to leave again. Here I still have the letter written by you in 1958, which we talked about during my last visit. It should be copied down from you. I have sent a message to ask it concerning the prophecy and prediction which you wrote in 1958, according to the notes of my grandfather and the information of my father, Svath, and ask it, and which you have formulated in today's German language. Askit has immediately transmitted these to me, and they are 162 verses which you must also copy. For this purpose, I want to leave you this device from which you can make the transcription after I have left. I will take it with me on my next visit.
Thanks. I will try to get everything done by Saturday after next. I will then add the whole thing to this conversation report, because I am sure you want me to write down everything we have spoken and will speak. If you can dictate the letter to me, then it will go faster than if I have to copy it. I can also use it at the right place during our last conversation. Wait a minute here. A computer is good for something. I want to write it down right away.
That is how it should be. So that was the end. Now all you need is your name, Edward A. Meier.
I did, thanks. One more question before we get to work. Do you have any other predictions to make?
No, because the final predictions are valid until the end of September. Then, when we resume the corrections with contact talk reports, I will give you new predictions. And what I want to say, here, if you want to work these things up for us.
What is it about?
They are questions of our spiritual leadership regarding higher spiritual teaching matters, that is, Srut knowledge. There are about 1,800 questions.
Ouch, that takes time, dear friend.
We know that. We can wait a few months for your answers.
Then it is no problem. If I can do my other work on top of it, I guess I can deliver everything to you in 3 months at the latest.
There is really no need to rush it. But if you think, now we should turn our attention to Hans-Georg's work, which we will probably not be able to finish until the end of the week.
Okay, there will be an hour of editing.
It must be enough for today. Goodbye, my friend. Salome.
Salome, and take care. See you soon. The following is a copy of Ptaah's recording device.
Prophecy and Prediction by Eduard A. Meier, Switzerland.
1. My eyes and senses see things of the future, which will happen and therefore be from today, the year 1958. 2. So I see and grasp things through time until the most distant future, which is still hidden from the earthly man. Many years will have passed when my prophecies and predictions have been fulfilled, and a new and better time will begin. 3. Until then, however, it is still far, very far, and much misery and distress as well as evil. Wars, terror, chaos, and catastrophes will have befallen mankind and the world. 4. If up to now huge crowds of believers of the religions have walked over the earth, in the future innumerable believers of unbelievably many mad sects will also stamp the ground of the earth, whereby some sect gurus will drive their believers into mass suicide and murder. 5. Like poisonous mushrooms, they will spread everywhere, and their delusional faith will echo like a trumpet sound over the whole world. 6. Sectarianism will bear evil fruit and will cost many lives through murder and suicide. Just as hundreds of thousands of people will be murdered by politics and power in various states, as in the Soviet Union, which will be dissolved in 1991 at the latest, and in the GDR, which, however, will only exist until the later 80s of this century, after which Germany will be reunited, whereby, in contrast, the USA, through its president, is waging a war in Iraq. But this war will be unsuccessful, which is why one of his sons, who will also become a state power of will, trigger a second war in Iraq in the third millennium, which will ultimately lead to an unbelievable disaster and to torture, as well as to mass murder by the U.S. forces and by insurgents. 7. Earth human being. I see the great expanses of the earth, the almost boundless seas, the great continents, huge mountains, vast forests, bubbling springs, flowing brooks, rivers, and all the lakes, and I see how they are all hated, diseased, destroyed, and largely annihilated by man. 8. It will not be centuries or millennia before all this happens, and all the prophetic and predictive word that remains to be said, for the beginning of all evil has already begun with the development of modern technology and with the horrors of the 2 world wars. 9. In the future, more evil wars will be spread throughout the world, and they will be so numerous that ordinary people will lose the overview. 10. Wars and uprisings will wipe out peoples and cause countries to collapse, and every powerful person will give new names to the country that has been taken under his command, thus making traditional names vanish into thin air. 11. Many races, workers, beggars, servants, extremists, anarchists, and neo-Nazis will cause misery, hardship, murder, and manslaughter, as well as terror, uprisings and revolutions, as well as violent demonstrations and much destruction of many possessions and human achievements as resistance against the anti-grassroots and corrupt authorities. 12. Terrorists will spread murder and destruction worldwide, after which they will return to their hiding places and hide to hatch new monstrosities and bring death and destruction upon humanity. 13. The terrorists, warmongers, criminals, prostitutes, and criminals will organize themselves worldwide and imagine themselves as kings and emperors of the world, while the people and the organs of order will be powerless to stand by and hide to protect their lives. 14. The Earth human, that is to say the Soviet Union, will already next year, on the 13th of September 1959, an unmanned object with rocket propulsion will land hard on the moon. And on the 12th of April 1961, an Earth human being will ascend to the sky with a rocket to orbit the Earth in outer space, after which on the 3rd of April 1961, a rocket will be launched. After that, on the 3rd of February 1966, a spaceflight object will be set down on the moon with a soft landing, after which in 1968 the outer space of the Earth will be left, and later the first journey to the moon will begin, whereby 5 manned moon landings will take place by the USA until the year 1972, while a 6th moon landing, the alleged first one, on the 20th of July 1969, will be based only on a worldwide staged fraud for political reasons of armament with the Soviet Union. 15. The time has just dawned when mankind is conquering the depths of the oceans and slowly the power of the sun in order to generate a wide variety of energy from it. 16. And man is on his way to decipher the secret of life in the next decades to the new millennium by unraveling the genes. 17. Similarly, in the 80s of this 20th century, it will be possible to conceive a human being by artificial insemination, whereas already at the turn of the third millennium, humans and animals can be cloned from individual cells without the actual act of procreation. 18. At the end of the second millennium, man is already taking the first far-reaching steps of genetic manipulation of fauna and flora, after which genetic manipulation of humans will be introduced in the third millennium. 19. The end of the second millennium will be marked on the one hand by the very fast, pervasive computer technology, and on the other hand by uprisings and a great war, which will be called the First Gulf War, and which will be followed by a second Gulf War right at the beginning of the third millennium, triggered by the USA, which since the First World War already consider themselves to be the world police, and also want to bring world domination under their thumb. 20. At the end of the second millennium and the beginning of the third millennium, man will consider himself to be the creation and will powerfully wreak havoc and bring destruction upon the whole of nature. 21. And already the time is coming when peoples will begin to mix, and when many people will flee from their homelands to find shelter elsewhere in the foreign land. And there will be many refugees who will have to fight for the preservation of their lives, while very many others will creep into the structures of the better-off states as economic refugees. 22. Prostitution is already on its way worldwide to become a public, unrestrained, and officially recognized trade, which will be taxable to the state. Ethics will no longer play a role in this respect, nor will decency and health. 23. In about 25 years, uninhibited prostitution will lead to the development of a deadly disease called AIDS, which will cost hundreds of millions of lives. 24. Child prostitution is also on the rise in enormous numbers, as are the sexual murders of women and children. 25. Trafficking in children and women for the purpose of prostitution and organ trafficking is already commonplace. But this evil will increase even more by the turn of the millennium. And in the third millennium, because organ transplants from person to person will become part of the everyday life of the terrestrial human being in just a few years' time. 26. Marriages between man and woman will already in a few years' time only be concluded for the sake of appearances, without any love to unite them, but only put together out of the personal interests of the individual partners. Consequently, the marriage covenants will only be lies and deception and no longer be of lasting value. Consequently, marriages will be divorced more and more frequently. 27. All of nature will also rise up against man and his irresponsible machinations with which he disturbs the course of nature, of the fauna and flora, and of all life. 28. From now on and well into the third millennium, severe to the most severe storms will bring unspeakable misery, distress, and suffering upon mankind, such as has never occurred since time immemorial. 29. The most severe earthquakes and seaquakes will have an elemental effect and claim millions of lives, as well as torrential rain masses that will cause enormous floods and wreak havoc such as mankind as a whole has never before experienced and seen. 30. And what happens in the last 42 years of the second millennium, along with very many other evils, along with chaos, cruelties, and catastrophes that have not been mentioned, everything also carries itself into the third millennium and takes its toll all around. 31. And when the second millennium comes to an end, man will stand in the darkness of his existence, wandering around as if in an impenetrable labyrinth and not finding his way out, for there will be deep night in his consciousness, but with the threatening red hot and the fiery clutches of religions and sects lurking. 32. And the religions and sects tremble in fury because the faithful are running away from them who finally want to turn to the truth. But the fiery catches of the religious power games of the religions and sects reach out to the young people to burn them in the flames of religious fanaticism and make them unable to escape. 33. So let young people beware of the lies and heresies of religions and sects, for their cruel fury with which they flock believers with lies and deceit will know no bounds. 34. Already now, and all the more so in the third millennium, man knows deep within himself that he must turn not to religions and sects but to the effective truth, the truth of creation, and the laws and commandments of creation, but although he hears the voice of truth within himself, he does not want to hear it because he is tormented by religious fear and cannot free himself from his religious or sectarian beliefs because he expects divine punishment for doing so. 35. And if man seeks the effective truth, he will be misled and deceived, for even more than in the second millennium, in the third millennium, there will be countless sectarians trading profitably in heresies and making horrendous profits from them. 36. Even the simple man himself, as well as the rich, will only see and count their mammon and strive for wealth, luxury, pleasure, and holidays, while the authorities and government will exploit the citizen with all kinds of new taxes and charges. 37. The Moloch mammon will produce much worse blossoms in the third millennium than in the 20th century, because immorality and crime, as well as economic crime and the promotion of war, etc., will know no bounds when it comes to hoarding mammon. 38. Criminal bankers, governments, and business leaders will make good on millions in pay and millions in severance pay, will engage in debt-making mismanagement, and thereby, at the beginning of the third millennium, ruin many traditional small and large banks, as well as business companies and large corporations worldwide. Just as citizens will run into private bankruptcy when they can no longer control their finances because they are driven away from the tried and tested money and are given plastic money in the form of plastic cards, with which they live in great shortage of money through their pay all sorts of things on credit, and get into horrendous debts, whereby special companies for the administration of plastic cards will also be created, while the banks will be out to get their customers dependent with plastic cards, which will then be called credit cards, whereby especially young people will be targeted, who will thereby accumulate immense mountains of debt, which will drive them into misery and distress. 39. The fire of mismanagement is also constantly spreading in the ineffectual governments, which also mismanage their own countries to ruin when they incur such immense debts that they increase in such a way that the state must be declared bankrupt. 40. And it will be that before the third millennium, in 1993, a European political and economic dictatorship will be created, known as Europe Union, which will bear the evil number 666, because it will ultimately put the citizens of all the member states under total control by means of biometric data in identity cards and in the form of small data slices in the head or body in a biometric identification system, which will be monitored and controlled by a central database, which will ultimately make it possible to determine the whereabouts of each person to the nearest meter. First, the USA and later the Europe Union will introduce this modern human enslavement, after which other states will follow. First of all, Switzerland. And through this process, the personal and civil rights of the humans will be drastically curtailed, which will be fundamentally planned during the construction of the Europe Union, whereby the citizens will ultimately be completely incapacitated and only be governed by the authorities, without them having a say in any state matters and decisions. 41. The morality of very many people will drop completely, whereby many villages and every town will be a Sodom and Gomorrah, because prostitution by adults and children will take forms that will completely overflow. 42. Many young human beings will succumb to extremism in every way, both in everyday life and at work, with drug, medicine, alcohol, and narcotics addiction rampant. 43. Many young human beings will run to extreme radical bald and neo-Nazi fronts and wave their flags and form corresponding organizations, which cause a lot of damage and mischief, attack innocent humans indiscriminately on the streets, and often cripple them. 44. Many blood reserves will be contaminated by viruses in the coming time, making humans sick and delivering them to death when their blood is transfused. 45. Towards the end of the 20th century, new planets are constantly being discovered in distant solar systems, but they cannot support human life. 46. Also in our solar system, new Sol satellites are discovered, which are far outside the Pluto orbit, but this will not be until after the turn of the millennium. 47. Already in 20 years the time will come when again severe and for humans deadly epidemics will occur, especially in Africa, but also in other countries, and partly there will be no cure for them. 48. Furthermore, great famines will continue to rage in the Third World, while in the rich industrialized countries there will be huge warehouses with canned food and other foodstuffs, while farmers will senselessly destroy fruit and vegetables, etc., because they do not want to sell the goods at low prices, because their greed for money and wealth will know no bounds, which is why they will also sell off their land and possessions for shiny coins in order to live on them and no longer have to do a decent job. 49. People will become more and more unrestrained in their greed for money and wealth, whereby even secret and unsolved murders of parents will be committed in order to inherit them. 50. More and more frequently, mothers are murdering their children at birth or abandoning them, while unnatural parents are beating their children to death and leaving them to die of thirst and starvation. 51. Many families will be destroyed in the future because fathers or mothers live in endless conflict, which often leads to fathers or mothers murdering all family members. 52. In 30 years' time, the boom that has lasted until then will collapse and cause immeasurable unemployment in all industrialized countries, not only making many millions of people unemployed and poor, but also destroying families, increasing crime and murders. 53. An unexpectedly arising problem of asylum seekers will be sweeping over all industrialized countries before the millennium change, and will cause an asylum seeker tourism, through which also very many antisocial elements will immigrate, which will trigger a criminal boom, whereby the belongings of many people will no longer be safe, nor will life and limb. 54. Already mankind, through his overpopulation delusion, has already changed the world and the climate to such an adverse effect that an increasing global warming is emerging, which will continue far into the third millennium and trigger enormous natural disasters. But this will not be the end, because everything is continuing in the same way, and at the beginning of the third millennium, there will be more than 7 billion humans on the earth, which will lead to even greater disaster and destruction worldwide, because on the one hand, nature is striking back with revenge, and on the other hand, man is doing everything possible to destroy the entire environment and life. 55. The ever-increasing mass of overpopulation is leading to indifference and effeminacy of human beings, whereby true interpersonal relationships cool down and disappear, while the male sex slowly but inexorably becomes more and more infertile. 56. Nuclear contamination of the environment through nuclear explosions. Nuclear power stations and radioactive waste from industry and hospitals, etc., will increasingly affect the entire life of fauna and flora and of man, and will disrupt his health, while mutations in fauna and flora and in man will also appear in a frightening way. 57. Neither air, water, land, mountains nor seas will be safe from man in the future, because everywhere he will irrevocably destroy everything to create space for the growing overpopulation and for sports purposes. For example, through ski lifts, mass settlements, mountain climbing, races with motor vehicles and motorboats, as well as with enormous residential buildings rising high into the sky, but also with road and tunnel constructions, etc. 58. Mankind will increasingly populate the earth, the air, and the seas, and will take away the habitat of all the ancestral creatures, and thus exterminate countless genera and species. 59. Man will rise more and more to become the commander of the earth, And already in the next 20 years he will strive for the power of creation, which is why he will no longer know any boundaries. But the whole thing will turn against him, because he will wander through the world like a drunken, blind ruler, rushing ahead in madness and tormenting himself. And at the end of his path, he will fall into a deep abyss. 60. In the coming time, whole cities will spring up out of the ground, and the land will be emptied of people more and more. 61. The order of men will be shaken more and more, and many will make their own laws and live by them. 62. The time will come in the third millennium when there will no longer be enough food for all of humanity, leading to cruel scenes of starvation and murder and manslaughter. 63. In the cities, criminals are already spreading, and organized gangs will attack, beat up, or even kill people, simply for fun or to rob them, because peaceful games and a normal life will no longer be enough for them. 64. Not many people will only go hungry, because they will also be exposed to the cold, turn blue, and freeze to death, and it will be the case that many will rather seek death than live an unworthy life in bitter poverty and begging. 65. Many people will in future catapult themselves out of life because they have become drug addicts, sick or old and feel lonely, helpless and abandoned, because their fellow human beings are degenerating more and more into pure utility and profit-seeking. The elderly will be put into old people's homes at horrendous prices and financially shamelessly gutted to the bone. 66. Suicides are becoming more and more common, as is euthanasia, because enterprising criminals take financial advantage of them, which will lead to death tourism to countries where euthanasia for murder and suicide will be allowed. The euthanasia workers will be traders without illusions and sell their poisons for suicide to anyone who wants them. 67. The drug problem will become more and more widespread, with globally organized criminal gangs maneuvering even children into the vicious circle of drug addiction. 68. Drugs and addictions are destroying people's bodies, and at the beginning of the third millennium, a new dangerous narcotic drug called crystal will cause a furore among addicted people, and within a few months it will rot, decompose, and age their faces and bodies as if the addicts were monsters and 100 years old. 69. Through selfishness, hatred, vengeance, unkindness, virtuelessness, and pleasure addiction, etc., the thoughts and feelings of the human beings become increasingly cold, corrupting their psyche and consciousness as well as their morals. 70. All those who are addicted to drugs of all kinds, which they drink, suck in, or inject into their blood, will be like wild animals and lose control over themselves. And many of them will rob, steal, break in and murder, rape and blackmail to get the poisons to which they are addicted. Their lives will be a torment and become a real disaster. 71. The already near future will bring that every human being will try to achieve as much pleasure, possessions, pleasure, money, and wealth as he can. And it will be that even parents will cheat their children, children their parents, and brothers and sisters their brothers and sisters, if they can gain a profit from it. 72. Marriages are no longer entered into out of love, but out of profit, for the sake of prestige, and as a result of false and short-term sentimentalism, and so it happens more and more frequently that man and woman reject and divorce each other as often as they often marry. 73. Like once to Sodom and Gomorrah, in the future many women and men will go through the streets and into whorehouses to take each and everyone as a sexual playmate and playmate, as each and everyone likes it at the moment. 74. Many married women and men will increasingly turn to other partners outside of marriage, and so many men will father children that they know nothing about. and women will bear children without knowing the name of the father. And so it will be that every 10th birth will produce a cuckoo child, which will be foisted upon the husband. And it will be that children will bear children, and that mothers will not mention the name of the father. 75. Many children will not have fathers or mothers because they will divorce or disappear unrecognized, because they will not want to be fathers or mothers or live in a marriage, because the order and tradition of a good and functioning family will be lost, just as the laws of the marriage covenant will no longer have any value, as if man were to become wild again. 76. And as it has already happened, it will continue to happen in the future and more that fathers sexually abuse their daughters. Young and old pedophiles sexually abuse children. Women of all ages are raped, violated, and murdered. Not infrequently in public and all over the world as a result of sex tourism, which is becoming more and more frequent. 77. Men will rape men and women will rape women, and children will be rented or sold to the highest bidder by their own parents, relatives, or by child abductors. 78. Fathers with their own daughters will father children, and mothers with their own sons will father offspring, causing blood mixing in their own families. And as evil spreads from bed to bed, psychic and conscious damage will be caused, and the condition of people no longer truly knowing each other in true love, but only recognizing each other through their sexual practices. 79. People will have haggard, tormented, and emaciated faces due to their way of life, and due to their thoughts and feelings, and due to the lack of their virtues and all good values, because their whole wrongly lived life will be reflected in them. 80. The time will come when everyone will no longer be heard when he speaks of law and order. Just as those who speak against religious and sectarian beliefs and laboriously spread the true truth concerning life, creation and its laws and commandments have not been heard for some time, and this will be especially true at the time when, in the 3rd millennium, a German religious fanatic pope will hold the papacy, who believes that he can save the world from disintegration and ruin through his fanatical belief in God. 81. All around the world, the devastating machinations of religions and sects will again spread, and countless false messiahs and false prophets will beguile and once again lead astray the unstable and truth-blind masses of people, and many of these believers will carry weapons and build bombs, and in their fanaticism will thereby spread many thousands of murders and great destruction. 82. The murdering and destructive fanatics of religions and sects will speak of justice in the name of God in their deadly, fiery faith, spreading misery, distress, death, and destruction. 83. And it will be that fanatical Islamists will take bloody revenge for the early crusades of the Christians on their late descendants, when they carry out their death-bringing and destructive acts through indomitable terror all over the world. 84. Thunder will crash over the earth, and thousandfold deaths will be rampant when criminal U.S. powers unleash wars in the wide world, and when Israeli powers spread terror, murder, death, and destruction as much as the Palestinians themselves, from whom countless suicide attacks will emanate. The murderers of all kinds of military and insurgent forms all over the world will be recruited from all strata of the population and drilled into callous and unscrupulous killing machines, which will also enjoy every kind of torture. 85. Organized murder and terror squads will secretly live in cities all over the world and plan and carry out deadly attacks to kill thousands of people and cause unimagined destruction. 86. There will no longer be any order or any effective rule to protect people's lives, because through the fault of warmongering state powers, insurgent and religious as well as sectarian and fanatical terrorism will flare up like a bright flash of lightning in the night to sow death and destruction. 87. As a result of inhuman terrorist attacks, torture and wars, a great many people will degenerate and fall back into barbarism, whereby each one will cry out for torture and the death of his neighbor if he disagrees or violates the law. Thus hatred and vengeance will spread, and even the organs of order will be maliciously attacked and prevented from establishing order, whereby cruelty among people will become more and more widespread, and no one will come to the aid of another when the latter is in need. 88. Soon men will no longer be judged according to righteousness, but only according to their faith and blood, while also the judges will exercise their office only after the little man has been hanged and the great scoundrel set free, because true righteousness will no longer be in demand, but will be judged only according to money, faith, and reputation. 89. In the course of the next decades, the children will be left more and more to neglect, because the parents are more and more chasing after mammon and pleasure, whereby the children are disregarded and left to their own devices in love and education, because like young animals they are pushed out of the house and family life and neglected, because nobody wants to take care of them anymore and hold the protective hand over them, whereby they slide into scenes of antisocial, narcotics, drugs, theft, robbery, crime, and prostitution. 90 worldwide, hatred will become more and more widespread, and the greed for power of those in power will no longer know any boundaries. Consequently, they will enact evil laws to harass the citizens, from whom no one will be spared, neither the old, nor the young, nor the children. 91. Houses will be destroyed and looted by criminal gangs, or houses will be broken into in order to attack, rob, and even kill the inhabitants. 92. The humans become more and more indifferent towards their neighbors. Even if they close their eyes when others are mistreated, women are raped or children are kidnapped in the open street. Children become merchandise and sex objects. Their weakness is forgotten, and they are trained like animals to be thrown away after use or slaughtered and murdered, because people no longer know love but only cruelty. 93. Already for quite some time, every man knows through public media like radio and newspapers what is happening on all ends of the earth. But this will only be the beginning, because the means of communication and news distribution will spread rapidly as through television, through which the events on all corners of the earth can be directly followed figuratively, as well as by all kinds of electronic transmission devices that transmit everything in word and image via satellites to the furthest corners of the earth. While in only 40 years, even the simplest citizen will carry a pocket phone with him and use it at every possible and impossible opportunity. 94. Due to the ever-increasing standard of living of people in the industrialized countries, they close their eyes to the misery in the third world. They probably see on television the starving children whose eyes and mouth and wounds are covered by countless flies, and those who are hunted by murderous military forces as targets like rabbits, or those who are killed to get their organs, which are sold expensively for transplants. 95. Many people will become not only indifferent but also merciless towards their neighbors. Consequently, they will avert their eyes so as not to see the misery and distress of their neighbor, and they will not care that children and adults die of hunger, because they will give them nothing or very little alms that will not be enough to live or to die. 96. The better-off people of the affluent states sleep on bags full of money, and what they give with one hand, they take away with the other, so that the person in need of help can neither live nor die, but only vegetate miserably. 97. Man trades with everything he gets his hands on, and consequently everything has its price, even water, which is a planetary common good of man, and everything is sold and nothing is given, and therefore a gift always demands a countergift. 98. Just as children are hunted down and killed at the price of their organs, grown-up people will offer their organs for transplants for money or bequeath them as a legacy, so nothing will be sacred to them anymore. Neither their body nor their blood, their organs, their consciousness or their psyche, because if they could sell their spirit form and make a profit from it, they would do so too. and for the organs people will be murdered, treacherously as well as by executions, while irresponsible doctors will profitably cannibalize the bodies of the dead for the sake of their organs. 99. Mankind has already changed the face of the earth so badly that it cannot be restored to its original form, and this will not be the end. For much worse changes will happen in the future if the forests continue to be cleared, and the fields and mountains are converted into human settlements, concreted over and asphalted, because man continues to think of himself as the master of the earth and of life, although he can never claim power over the planet because its nature will fight back and put mankind in his place. 100. Even if nature resists the human madness of planetary destruction, the earth will become more and more naked and barren, and through man's fault the air will burn because the ozone layer is slowly being destroyed. 101. The waters of the earth will be transformed by man more and more into foul-smelling puddles, and all life will slowly wither away, while the riches of the earth will be exhausted to the last, whereby all goods will become scarce, and the hatred of men for one another will increase, because each one wants to have what his neighbor still has. 102. Man's consciousness as well as his reason and intellect will be his prisoners, and he will be drunk with religious and sectarian beliefs, whereby he will not realize that he is being deceived more and more by religions and sects, and that he is being removed from the effective truth of creation and its laws and commandments. Consequently, he will chase after unreal religious and sectarian images and reflections that keep him from the truth and make him the willing sheep of evil. 103. Religions and sects, like evil beasts of prey, attack their believers, driving them together and plunging them into the deepest abyss of deception and ignorance. And to satisfy all this, they incite one against another, so as to be able to snatch all in their clutches and deprive them of the life of truth. 104. As before, religions and sects, through their representatives and gurus, will continue to dominate for some time to come, in order to dominate and command the innocent and ignorant inactive humans. But gradually, in the far future, they will lose their places of worship, where they preach nonsense and mislead and enslave the people. But their time will come when they will have to hide their faces and keep their names secret so as not to fall victim to the fury of the humans as a result of their misleading. 105. But it is still the case that every believer is in truth a serf of the religions and sects, although everyone erroneously believes himself to be a free man. But this will change. For the time will come when no one or hardly anyone will take part in the meetings of the gurus, the masters, the exalted, the enlightened, the priests' caps, the popes and priests, etc., for many of the people will rise up and oppose the religions and sects in order to defeat their millennial lies by the truth. 106. The overpopulation will rise inexorably by the unreasonableness of men, and soon they will be as numerous on the earth as ants, and they will swarm about in confusion and senseless when they are pushed that they lose all control over themselves. And many will be crushed when they perish helplessly in the masses. 107. The religions and sects will mix in the future just like the people who, by mixing peoples, make their own people into a multi-ethnic state. 108. All around the world there is hypocritically more and more talk of peace, while mendacious and sectarian state powers are sneakily fomenting wars and causing them to break out, and everywhere hostile families and neighbors are giving each other hell on earth, or hostile peoples and tribes are fighting each other in bloody feuds. 109. For some time now man has been abandoning the way of nature, and this will continue to happen much more, for man in his self-importance believes that he is master of life and death. 110. In the time to come, people will be increasingly dissatisfied with their own bodies, and so they will undergo operations of all kinds to be more well-proportioned and more beautiful than they imagine. but the whole thing will be detrimental to their health and will not infrequently lead to mutilation or even death. 111. There will be no more cohesion in families, and family members will be scattered to the four winds. 112. Through beauty cures and beauty products, people will become addicted to early external signs of aging and will have wrinkles and white hair early on, just like the elderly, because the products used will damage the skin just as much as the increasingly dangerous and hotter sunlight. 113. Many people will be wandering around in the coming time without a foothold in life, without guidance and direction, because through the lack of love and warmth, as well as the relationships from person to person, the consciousness, thoughts, and feelings as well as the psyche will wither away, resulting in a great many mental illnesses and breakdowns, which will often lead to suicide, because these people will no longer be accessible to help. 114. A great many people will, in the course of time, renounce religions and sects, but still will not accept the truth concerning creation and also its laws and commandments, because they want to direct their lives like a mount themselves, although they lack the necessary knowledge and experience to do so. 115. And already the terrestrial human being is at the door, which will enable him to determine the fruit in the womb of the woman in relation to her masculinity or femininity, from which it will of course result that ultimately the sex of the progeny will be determined already from the bottom up, by fertilizing the female egg in the test tube with corresponding sperm and then inserting it into the womb, while all other life that is undesirable is killed off. 116. Man will increasingly consider himself to be the creation, especially the powerful, who take everything on land, possessions and people, whatever and however they please, while the ordinary people are treated as poor and weak and as the last cattle, making the dwellings of the common people into prisons in which people dwell in fear of the powerful and in which hatred develops unrestrainedly in them. 117. The hatred in man will create a secret order of destruction which will rage darkly in man and produce evil poison, which is aimed at fighting against the authorities and at the same time itself to money and wealth and to dominion over the earth. But in the end the weak will obey the rules of the powerful. But it will be that in the dark laws will be made, whereby the poison of hatred will be directed against religions and sects, and the sting of hatred will spread against them to give the truth the place it deserves. 118. It will turn out that people will be idle, walking around with an empty gaze and not knowing where to go, because when the religions and sects disappear, they will have no more places of worship and no more cult preachers and cult leaders to lead them astray and confusion, which is why they will first be aimless or like a germinating seed that cannot yet take root. Consequently, men will wander around hopelessly, exposed, humiliated, and everywhere senselessly seeking a hold, but which they only find when they turn to creative truth and creative laws and commandments. But only will they hate and fight against themselves and hate their lives before they find the way to the truth. 119. When the third millennium comes, many diseases and pestilences will be rampant, and many waters will be dried up and continue to dry up, while others will become brackish and poisonous or become rare, threatening the existence and life of many people, which will lead to this, that they will painstakingly recreate much of what they have destroyed, and that they will preserve what is left with costly means, because some people who think further ahead recognize that they must give back to nature what they have wrested maliciously from it. 120. But the third millennium will also be the time when people will be afraid of the future, because the political, military, and natural world situation will be very precarious, because the powers of the USA and Israel threaten war and destruction just as much as the rebellious terrorists worldwide. In addition to this, because man has so terribly torn, raped, and defiled nature, that it will strike back with enormous sea and earthquakes and with tremendous rainstorms and primeval storms. 121. The earth will rise up against mankind through man's fault. Through its overpopulation and the tremendous needs associated with it, and through its unnatural behavior and destruction, as well as through the exploitation of its resources, and will shake around the globe with primeval violence and drag people to their death by the hundreds of thousands, destroying entire cities. 122. The earth will take revenge on man for his actions, because he will not have listened to the prophecies and statements of the wise men who warned of all evil, and consequently he will have to accept from now on evil threats to nature and enormous destruction. Because from now on and far into the third millennium, villages will be buried under mudslides and under snow and ice avalanches, while elsewhere abysses in the ground will open up and tear everything destructively into themselves, never to come to the surface again. 123. But still man will be stubborn and will not listen to the words, advice and warnings of the prophets and wise men, but this will take revenge. Because tremendous fires will destroy large forests, villages and towns, and claim many lives. Because the fires will have elemental force and drive people out of their ancestral homes, which will be robbed by unscrupulous looters, just as it will be in the villages and towns, which will be abandoned by sea and earthquakes and by storms. 124. And through the fault of man, who will smuggle CFCs into the atmosphere, the earth will burn, and the black and white skin cancer will spread and cause many deaths. And all this because through human irrationality, the ozone layer, which protects against the sun's radiation, will be destroyed to a large extent, whereby the atmosphere will be like a curtain with holes, and the strong and burning light of the sun will burn the skin and irreparably blind the eyes of many people. 125. But the fear of the people will be too late, because too much will already be destroyed and annihilated at the turn of the millennium. Consequently, more and more deserts will cover the earth, and the raining torrential waters will become ever more powerful and deeper, flooding and destroying everything. 126. Even before the third millennium and well into it, the deforestation of the rainforests will cause the oxygen content of the air to decrease imperceptibly, which will have an effect on the health of man and animals, while at the same time the pollution of the environment and the air will have taken such forms that people will fall ill, and the weak among them will perish. 127. And the time will come in the third millennium when large parts of the continents will disappear and people will have to flee to the mountains. But their sense of disaster will be short-lived, for they will forget everything quickly and will endeavor to rebuild many things. For already they are creating illusions through cinema and television, and later through a worldwide network of computers and electronics, through which they deceive themselves and see things, who do not exist and are only visually intended for the eyes. Consequently, their sense of reality dwindles, and they are no longer able to distinguish between reality and fiction, making them lose themselves more and more in the labyrinth of life, while those who create the illusions commercially as well as religiously and sectarian have easy games with believers, cheating them in all possible ways and making them humiliating beings like submissive dogs. 128. Towards the end of the second millennium, researchers will clone animals and change their genes at will, and in the third millennium, researchers will presume to breed human beings from test tubes to serve as human spare parts stores for organs. 129. It has already happened, and in the third millennium it will continue, that terrestrial man will irrevocably exterminate many animal species and their subspecies to air, land, and water, because profit is more important to him than the preservation of fauna. 130, as it is already the case in the third millennium, and it will be even more so in the third millennium, and in fact extremely increased, that children will no longer enjoy a true education, and their consciousness will not be formed within the framework of evolution, for they will no longer be taught the truth by their parents, so they will be more and more ignorant of the truth and the teaching of life. So they will be, like their parents, hopeless, ignorant, and rebellious, and will devote themselves only to pleasure. 131. Even in the third millennium, man will become more and more aggressive and will consider himself to be the supreme power, and consequently he will strike everywhere in hatred and anger, as well as in greed and jealousy, as and when he pleases. And he will be strong in his evil thoughts and feelings and in his degenerate actions, for the power he has attained makes him unpredictable, and he will blindly destroy many things that have been laboriously attained and built up with joyful wailing. 132. Long into the third millennium, man will remain faint-hearted and a dwarf in the development of his knowledge and wisdom and love, and will be driven by the conduct of power and the domination of his fellow man, while his head will be crammed with unnecessary and false knowledge of crazy religious, sectarian, philosophical, military, combative, and blood, revenge, and revenge. Seeking teachings. 133. As ever, even in the third millennium, the terrestrial human being will for a long time not know why he lives and dies, what death means and what rebirth and birth means. For as ever he will uselessly wave his arms in vain, searching in vain for the truth of creation and its laws and commandments, because he will cling, as he has done since ancient times, to the religions and sects that make him whimper like little children. 134. In the third millennium, the believers of the various religions and sects will be fighting each other, as they have done since time immemorial, because every believer wants to have the only true God, whether he is called Shiva, God, or Allah, so the earth will become a battlefield in some places, when Christians, Islamists, and Jews, etc. are at war with one another as in olden times and as it is happening now, for all scold the unbelievers of other faiths, and all want to defend and spread the purity of their faith to the point of blood, even if great powers oppose them, doubting the rightness of their actions. 135. In the third millennium, as now in 1958, countless people will be excluded from the life of society, because many will continue to live as poor, antisocial, beggars and the poor, because they will not be accepted by society, but will be outcasts or unemployed and treated as subhumans, against which no authority or government will do anything, but still exploits even the poor and beggars with all kinds of taxes and taxes, so that they cannot afford a roof over their heads and have no more civil rights, because they are outcasts of those who live in abundance. And they will be half naked because they cannot afford clothes, and if they have something to sell, it will be only their body, its organs, or the way of fornication. 136. Many humans in the third millennium will hear of the old prophecies and predictions, of the prophecies of the prophets handed down from time immemorial, and the warnings of the wise, and they will thirst for vengeance and will call forth the times of this, when the people will rise up and cry out for the truth. 137. But before the people cry out for the truth, they will be lost in an impenetrable labyrinth, in which there will be great fear and suspicion, and man will be driven forward restlessly to find his way out of misery and all distress. 138. The truth of creation and its laws and commandments, as well as the teaching of the Spirit and the teaching of life, will be loud and strong and spread all over the world. But the man on earth does not want to hear it, for only a few who are capable of reason and understanding will turn to the great teaching, while all the others will want to possess more and indulge in illusions, which they will make up in their minds, incited by bad and false prophets in matters of religion and sectarianism. 139. And long will be the time when all these events will take place, long into the third millennium, long 800 years, because only then will the seeds of the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of creation and its laws and commandments and the teaching of life, slowly begin to germinate in the masses of mankind, because they will slowly open their eyes and their ears and begin to search honestly for the true truth. 140. The human beings of the earth will listen and hear the teaching of the prophets, because at last they will learn to see with open eyes and understand each other. And everyone will be aware that when one person is beaten or hurt with words, the other will feel pain. 141. It will be the time when the human beings will become one out of humanity and understand that each one is a small part of the neighbor, and that only unity makes strong, and that neither skin color nor faith, but only the common and effective truth regarding the creation and its laws and commandments are important. 142. And at that time it will be that worldwide only one single and valuable language will be spoken, and that people will finally become true human beings. 143. And at that time it will be that earthly men will have conquered the space of the world and will travel into the deep vastness of the universe, having created artificial stations outside the Earth's atmosphere, where many people will live, work, and work. 144. And at that time the terrestrial man will be building great cities in the seas, and they will be moving about in the depths of the waters on a daily basis, feeding on seafood of all kinds. 145. And at that time it will be that the human beings will again talk reasonably and reverently with each other, and they will take up the old messages of the true prophets, for their thoughts and feelings will be open to each other, and consciousness and psyche will be balanced. 146. And at that time the human beings will be several times older than they are today in 1958, for their age will be hundreds of years. 147. And at that time it will be that men will recognize the power of their consciousness and learn the things which the true prophets knew and which are still hidden to them as a secret. So they will open one door after the other and gain tremendous insights and knowledge and wisdom about the truth of creation and its laws and commandments, in order to develop and use their powers of consciousness with it. 148. And at that time it will be that men will finally find their way out of their dark labyrinth and find the noble life bubbling again like a clear spring. 149. And at that time it will be that the human beings will again learn and become knowledgeable about the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of the creation and its commandments and laws, and the teaching of life. And parents will again educate their children and teach them the teaching of the truth, so that they may understand life, dying, death, rebirth, and birth, as well as earth and heaven. 150. And it will be at that time that man will have become taller and more agile in growth, and his powers of consciousness will surround everything, and he will also possess all the things he wants. 151. And at that time it will be that man alone will no longer be the power of the ruler, for henceforth woman will direct the destiny of the world and of mankind as the true mother of the earth. For she will wield her scepter over man and break his lust for power, self-importance, lust for power, and lust for war, in order to end the times of ugly male barbarism and to nip man's diabolical and murderous as well as autocratic actions in the bud in order to finally make peace come to earth. 152. And at that time it will be that true love will awaken in man on earth and will be shared with all, whereby existence will turn into an easy time and long-cherished dreams, and wishes will become reality, while the evolution of consciousness will take possession of all men, whereby the true end of barbarism will come. 153. And it will be at that time when no longer religious and sectarian faith, but only the pure truth of creation and its laws will be valid, whereby the happy days of mankind will begin, and man will find man again, and recognize and honor him as his equal. 154, and it will be at that time when the fourth millennium comes according to Emmanuel's Christian calendar, that the earth and its humanity will again have their creative order and be true love and harmony, true freedom and harmony, and true world peace. 155. And at that time it will be that man will rush through the universe in great and mighty spaceships, from one end to the other, and for him there will be no more boundaries. 156. And at that time it will be that the forests, meadows, fields and fields will blossom again, as well as the deserts, which will be alive and planted, and in which many different trees, bushes, grasses, and flowers will reveal their splendor, so that the earth will be a wonderful garden, in which man will respect and honor everything that lives, crawls, and flees there. 157. And at that time it will be that man will rebuild and purify all that he has destroyed or polluted, for from then on he will honor and protect nature and life, for he will be knowledgeable and wise, and thereby think for the future of the planet and humanity, to whom he will show all respect and reverence. 158. And at that time it will be that each person will walk in step with the other, and the one will no longer harbor the other, and people will once again trust each other. They will no longer be cheated. They will no longer be robbed, and murdered. 159. And at that time it will be that men on earth will know everything about their own bodies and about the bodies of all creatures, as they will also be knowledgeable in all things of the world and of life and of the creative natural laws, whereby diseases and epidemics will be healed before they can appear, because it will be that every man will be his own, knowing and able healer as well as for his fellow man. As a whole, man will have understood that he can only exist and live in community, that one must help the other, that he must give and not only take, and that as an individual he must see and understand himself as the guardian of the planet, of humanity, and of the human order. 160. And it will be at that time that the earth humans will have learned to give and share in honesty and love, and that stinginess is as much a means of dissatisfaction as is closeness to one's neighbor, so that no loneliness will come about. But man must first learn everything and turn to the forces of his consciousness, and the teaching of the Spirit, and the teaching of creation and its laws, and the teaching of life. But this requires an iron fist to enforce it, so that order banishes chaos and man finds the right path again. 161. And it will be at that time, when the fourth millennium comes to Emmanuel, that man will be the bearer of the truth of creation, and that all living beings are creatures of the one and only creation, of universal consciousness, and that creation alone is and knows the secret of all things, and that it stands immeasurably higher than all gods and idols, which are without exception of human origin. 162. And it will be at that time that mankind will remember the prophecies of the true prophets and what once was in all the past, just as they will know what the future will be, because they will be able to see, through foresight, the events and the course and changes of the world, of humanity and of the universe, as well as the mystery of living and dying, and therefore will no longer be afraid of their own death, for they will know that life is eternal, alternating with the life of death and the new life on earth, as determined by creation through its unshakable laws, which are unchanging and eternally valid. Eduard A. Meier, Wittikon Castle, Wittikon, Zayat, Switzerland.